Okay, the second part of the biological approach. So this will be AO3. You'll be able to apply the knowledge gained from your AO1 lesson, so understand what that actually means for real life, and we'll look at some examples of how the biological approach has helped develop things, obvious things like drugs. You will be able to evaluate the biological approach in terms of its method, application and conclusions. Okay, and you'll be able to evaluate the biological approach in terms of deterministic or determinism and its stance on nature nurture. I may also discuss at the end things like reductionism, non-empathetic, things like that. But AO3. Okay, so the first and huge positive, and if you're writing a kind of outline and evaluate, then this comes in the positive category, okay, is that it is very scientific. When we look at comparing and contrasting the different approaches, the biological one, and the behavioural ones are also scientific, but the biological definitely highly scientific. Okay, MRIs, hopefully you know what those are. Some of you might even have had those, the big magnetic kind of big polos in hospitals that can look inside your brain. If you've watched episodes of House or Bad Knees, for me anyway, they lots of scans. When a scan shows something, that is obviously scientific. It's not kind of wishy-washy. And we think it's there. It is there. It is on a scan. We have found it. Okay, so they use these precise things. We look at twin studies, okay, and we've discussed that in AO1 and how that actually works, family, and also drug trials are very, very scientific. I've taken part in quite a few. If any of you guys go to university and study psychology, you may go and take part in trials, some of which will use drugs or alcohol or whatever to actually look at what difference does it make. Here's one person who is not taking the drug, here is somebody that is. What are the differences? Very, very scientific, very controlled, very repeatable. All right. Therefore, it's possible to accurately measure biological and neural processes in a way not open to bias, and is therefore reliable. And just jumped into my brain there as a kind of side story. One of the kind of BBC things, documentaries that we could watch, you could watch, actually gets people to take very small amounts of acid, small amounts of weed, and puts them into an MRI scanner and actually looks at what their brain's doing. So, it's really, really accurate to measure not just how does a drug feel, actually what is it doing to your brain at that given time. Okay. The second and another positive of the biological approach is its real life application, real world application, its ability to change how we act and improve our life, basically. Okay, and development of psychoactive drugs that treat serious mental illnesses such as depression. I don't think there's anyone that will watch this that doesn't take a drug at some point. Paracetamol, aspirin, whatever it may be. As a kind of Western society, we massively rely on the kind of drug pharmaceutical companies to supply things to help with weight loss, with caffeine, in the sense of, take this and that will help you out in the mid-afternoon, do this, and vitamin C. That all of these things that have been developed as real life applications from the biological approach. Okay, these drugs are not effective for all patients, but they have revolutionised treatment for many. So, a huge help in the mental disorder category, drugs have been. This is a strength of biological approaches. It means that sufferers are able to manage their condition and live a relatively normal life rather than being in hospital. So that's at one extreme. You can argue it that way, that for schizophrenia, depression, things clearly do work and have helped, and that is a massive positive for the biological approach. In a quick comparison, top of my head would be something maybe like the psychodynamic, if you've looked at that yet, or we will in the future. It's very hard to measure whether you're having a positive effect on patients. They come in and they talk, and you go through childhood problems and blah, 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 but it's really hard scientifically to measure whether you've actually improved their life or not. Okay, causal conclusions. The biological approach offers explanations for mental illness in terms of the action of neurotransmitters in the brain. So when you look at OCD, depression, schizophrenia, they would explain, a biological approach would explain it by being, there's this little bit of neurotransmitter that's not working well, or there's this that serotonin's lacking, or you've got too much, too little. So it's all of this kind of explanations there. Evidence for the relationship comes from studies that show a particular drug reducing symptoms for a mental disorder, and therefore it is assumed that this neurochemical drug causes the disorder. And the good example there, this is like saying a headache is caused by lack of paracetamol. So when you look at serotonin, or dopamine even, it's this idea that they've proven, oh well, if we give you more or less, then the mental disorder goes away. Therefore, it is caused by having too much or not enough. Discovering an association between two factors does not mean that one causes the other. Right? So there is a problem with that, and I think that line of saying that headache is caused by lack of paracetamol, it's not saying paracetamol. You get it, you'll understand it. Okay. Deterministic view of behaviour. Okay, the biological approach is deterministic in the sense that it sees human behaviour as governed by internal biological causes over which we have no control. So quickly, what is deterministic? Deterministic is saying that we can predict your behaviour. We can, if you were to give a biological psychologist all of your genes and here's what I am, and be able to break it down and have that map in front of you, they would say they'd be able to predict your behaviour, because it's going to be, oh look, he's got too much of this or not enough of this means that. Okay? And that we have no control, we have no free will, we can't make those decisions because of our biological makeup. So I'm sat here, I'm this type of person because of that. And that sounds, interesting, but actually the next point is when you really start to see the problems that can have. Okay, the implications on the legal system. One of the rules of law is that offenders are seen as legally and morally responsible for their actions. If you say, well, actually, if you deterministic view, from the moment I was born, I've had no control over what I've been doing, and the fact that I've just gone and killed 1 million people isn't my fault, Mr. Officer, because it's been governed by my internal biological causes over which I have no control. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you say that to a police officer, but from a biological point of view, you could. So the discovery of a criminal gene would complicate this principle, and if you're an A2 student, you've already looked at aggression, and you'll know that there is one that has kind of been found that makes us more aggressive. And then if you have that gene, are you then should you be in the court of law? Should you get less punishment? So sorry, I've got this type of gene, he doesn't, so I'm allowed to be more violent, I'm allowed to do this. So you can see how the deterministic view of the biological approach can then lead to problems such as the legal system. Okay, you cannot separate nature and nurture. So you'll learn along the way in comparison, obviously biological approach is hugely nature. Okay, and the behavioural approach is hugely nurture. Social learning theory, hugely nurture. Identical twins, non-identical twins, and members of the same family all have similar genetics. Fine, we can deal with that. Therefore, the biological approach argues that any similarities must be genetic. However, and this is where the lines get a bit washy, they would generally be exposed to the exact same environmental conditions. If you're in the same family, you're going to have the same weather, you're going to have the same house, you're going to have the same food. All of these things are going to be exactly the same as well. So it's very hard to separate out nature and nurture. This means that findings could just as easily be interpreted as supporting nurture rather than nature. Okay, so actually, to really have a perfect example to prove or disprove the idea of nature and nurture, we need to get 100% identical twins at birth and separate them and put them in hugely different environments, and then see what's the same, what has a concordance rate, what doesn't, and then that would be able to do us. But that is very hard to find. So whenever you have identical twins, you're looking obviously at the same genetics, but also the same environment. So it's hard to separate, and that's just a discussion point. Okay, next lesson, if you're doing these in order, will be psychodynamic.